And good morning. It is time for the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. And here in your studio, it's our studio, it's everybody's studio, with a big old smile on her face, I meant to say your host, Mike Hewitt. Good morning, Mike.
Wow, is he a smooth talker, am I telling you? Listen, in the studio is Ludwig von Wiedendorsky and Pax, along with Brian Thomas, the smooth talker. Listen, if I were a Trump publican, I would be an excited son of a gun right now. What say you, Miles Bauer?
Well, last night was certainly a strong statement towards making a Trump publican's case.
I would think that you're right. Listen, everyone knows I'm not quite across that bridge yet, but I cannot deny math. When I look at it, first off, he didn't just win, he resoundingly won in each of the 5 states. I mean, hugely. And to his own point, when you have a 3-person race and you're picking up 58, 59, 60%, respectively, depending on which state, that is a monster victory. It just is. So I tip my hat to him. Powerful victories. And I'll go with that. And one of the reasons I wanted to get you back on this morning, Miles, is not just to review those numbers, but to speculate a little bit. I watched Fox News and CNN and another cable news network where they were speculating on what the delegate count will be going forward, and he'll take this state, he'll not take that state. And I got to tell you, I'm a Cruz guy, as you're aware, as everyone's aware. But that said, I think the tailwind that he picked up last night is unstoppable. And I don't see a contested convention. Am I off in the weeds here on this? What do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say, I pretty much have to agree with what they were saying last night, that the Never Trump group has their Waterloo in Indiana. And I would say if they can't hold him down in Indiana, then I think it's time to call it a day, because at some point we got to turn our guns towards Hillary to get this thing turned off.
Well, I think that's exactly right. One of the things I saw on Facebook early this morning when I was just perusing through looking at different, one of them says, time to change the hashtag to Never Hillary. And in truth, it's probably really close to that time. And when I look at the polls of Indiana, I am a cruiser, folks, so don't misunderstand me. But when I look at the polls, I'm also a realist. And so I think the tailwind, he's got the headwinds. He really does. And at this point, when you have those kind of victories, the speculation that there's going to be a candidate parachuted in and all of that just falls on, it's just silly. It's not possible. Nobody in their right mind could try to parachute a candidate in on a guy that's winning by 60% with 3 candidate races. So that's my view.
And you know, the one thing that I thought was telling last night was that, did you see the percentage of women that were actually voting for Trump? And Trump has always struggled with women, and now the women, at least out east, were starting to turn. So I thought that was
from the Precision Garage Door Studios.
WTKG Grand Rapids, WMAX FM HD2 Holland. This is West Michigan's Talk 1230. WTKG.
Difficult time picking up the women vote, and in Trump, or it may be that I don't know how he fits in to whether he's the cause of it or just happens to be in the right place at the right time. But there is a realignment taking place. I don't think there's any question about that. And specifically, I'll get to it, the labor union, and I'm not talking about Teamsters and UAW, but those folks that have trade unions, which in my mind is slightly different. So the plumbers unions, et cetera, that do a lot of work for blue-collar workers, for training and for organizing, and yes, some labor relations. Those folks are largely turning towards Donald Trump. And that's something that we haven't seen maybe since Reagan, but in truth, maybe Reagan didn't do it as well as Trump seems to be doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and as you know, you and I have traded text. I said I think we're no longer in the post-World War II era. We are starting to see that the blue-collar groups no longer really kind of believe the Democrat message, and that they are starting to leave the party in a way like we have never seen before.
Well, the platform that says that all Republicans are grossly rich and that's not representative of America, frankly, is just a lie. It's just not true. When, in fact, I've joked about going to the convention. When you look across the parking lot, you don't see a bunch of Rolls Royces. You see a bunch of middle-class cars with rust holes because we're in Michigan. And that doesn't represent the image that the Democratic Party has been able to, and this is, by the way, success on their part. They've been able to paint the Republican Party or brand them with that image, but it's really starting to fade because it's just not true. And I think the folks that are coming to Trump are proof of that.
Yeah, and you know, Mike, you know, one of the things that kind of that sticks out to me. Remember the whole Obama Joe the Plumber thing from several years ago,
right? And he's one of the people I had in mind, and by the way, including son-in-laws of mine that are part of trade unions that are absolutely not part of what Hillary would think that they're just naturally a part of, because they're not.
Well, you think some of those trade unions are also looking at our side because they're looking at the $15 hour wage, going, wait a second, I make that as a plumber, and then you want to pay a fast food guy that, and I went through the trade school and I went through the apprenticeships. You know,
they may be thinking that, Matt, but the other thing that they may be thinking in to quote an old Reagan thing, but you know, a high tide lifts all boats, and if Trump can do the things he's talking about doing, if he can only do a little bit of what he's talking about doing, it's more work and brings competition. And forget fixed wages, because I reject that politics entirely. But competition does drive wages. And those folks are not stupid about that. Am I right, Miles?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think some of this, too, is kind of going back to what I was saying earlier about I think that Washington has lost touch with the common person. And that I think really underscores a lot of this. I think a lot of the points that you're bringing up are extremely valid, but I think it all kind of goes back to that central point. Washington has lost touch with what's going on out here with the great unwashed, period.
What's fascinating about it, and we've kind of talked on this before, but I'll know various folks that are running for Congress, and they're wonderful people, by the way, and tending to be pretty grounded. And when they get there, after one or two cycles there, they've gone through a metamorphosis. And I blame it on the caucus. Maybe it's lobbyists, maybe it's a little bit of a lot of things, but they change. Part of it, by the way, may even be how we treat them, because we treat them differently. I'll hear groups of people in the circles that I run in politically that will really just absolutely verbally terrorize one or so representatives, and then when the representative gets in the room, they're everything but kissing the ring. And so I think there's a lot of things that play into it, but one thing is for certain, the culture no longer represents America. That part I agree with you on, for whatever the reason.
Yeah, and I think, and fortunately it came to a head at all the right time, at the same time, regardless what region of the country you were at. Had this occurred in different regions at different times, I don't think it would have been as effective, and I don't think you would have seen the Trump phenomenon. This is a fascinating part of history, and you've heard me say this before, I don't think you and I will ever live to see a more fascinating election than the one that we're going through now.
Part of it is foundational. And to me, it's the balance between state and federal power. And those folks that we've sent to Washington, D.C. to represent us, which is their function, that's why we call them representatives, they seem to embrace this concept that they're not, that balance is gone when they get there, and of course it's not. And I think I'm probably saying this poorly, but one of the reasons that it's universal across most of the states or all of the states is that their overwhelming central power in Washington, D.C. is affecting everybody on both sides of the aisle, regardless of your political stripe. Too much central power is a problem, and if you don't believe me, ask former members of the Politburo.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that we really need to stress. This is not a Republican thing. This is not a right thing.
Right.
This is something that's occurring across the board.
Absolutely agree. Hence Bernie. Now Bernie is on. Yep. Bernie is probably done, and if he's not done this morning, I don't know what he clings to, at least financially. But having said that, folks, when Bernie goes to the Democratic convention, he's going to bring a lot of power with him. So he's going to be able to have some effect on his party and how his party governs. So it's not all for naught. And I say that because I think that there are certainly some other caveats that go with what's made him successful and Trump successful. But in the end, it's raw frustration, and he's going to have an impact on it. So,
and keep in mind what they were saying is that they think some of the Bernie supporters will not vote for Hillary, and they will cross over and they will go to Trump.
I got to tell you on that point. I remember you mentioning it, and I've heard it other places. And I'll obviously I'm going to end up voting for Trump in the general election. When I'm sitting there looking at the ballot, it doesn't matter what I say between now and then. When I'm looking at Trump or Hillary, this is a no-brainer. But what I can't imagine is this is not a statement against Bernie, by the way, or Hillary, but I can't imagine what would cause me to segue from Trump to Bernie or from Bernie to Trump, other than their assault on the establishment. I don't see any binding politics between them.
Well, it's the independents, I think, because like yesterday he won. The one state he won was Rhode Island, and it's the only state that you didn't have to be declared.
Right.
So the independents are what's pushing him in the wins. But what do you guys think about Trump calling him out for independent? Because an independent run as a third party. Because remember,
he's wanting to splinter the Democrat Party.
Well, we know. We know why Trump wants to do it. But do you think Bernie does it?
Everyone behind him smiled when he said it.
Yeah. Do you think he does it though? Because he clearly states, "I'm an independent." And there was a letter in 1980. He was not going to Democratic convention because he's not a Democrat.
I think he'd like the idea, but I don't think he'll do it. I don't think he's a stupid person. No, because he can't win. The only thing he can do is cause her to lose.
And sometimes that's enough to do it, isn't it?
I don't know if it depends on whether he's an ideologue or not. Well, of course he's an ideologue. He's a socialist.
Yeah.
What do you think, Miles?
Yeah, I was going to say I seriously doubt he would do it. I applaud Trump for asking him to do it because I think it shows something about Trump himself. But I don't think at the end of the day Bernie would actually do that, and it would be interesting to see if he could even raise the money to actually do that or not.
Yeah, I don't think he could because it's just a no-win circumstance for either him or Hillary, and I think but frankly I think Bernie takes enough power back to Washington and to the convention to whet his appetite for the change he wants. He doesn't get everything he wants, but he gets a few really good slices of bread. That's kind of how I see that. But same as when I'm looking at Cruz as an example. I don't see a path to victory for Cruz whatsoever, even in an open convention. I just don't see it. Can he pick up some Trump delegates? Yes. Is it enough to win? No. I just don't see it. And I don't think anybody sees it. One of the things I think you and I agree on, Miles, is listening to Newt Gingrich last night, who I have a tremendous amount of admiration for his intellect and his calm approach to most issues. I think his review of it was spot on. This is a signal that the establishment they need to calm down and get on board.
Yeah, I completely agree. And as you and I have been saying for quite a few weeks, if Cruz and Trump would just get on the same page together, they would dominate the Rules Committee. They would dominate the convention. They would have this thing going away.
When you look at tickets, though, and on that point, in fact, I think I'm in overtime. I've got a guy hanging on the line for us right now. But so one quick last thing. When you look at him picking a vice presidential running mate, does he look to Kasich for Ohio? Does he look for the West Coast? And therefore Cruz. What's the one name that pops into your head?
I got to say that he's got to look at, first he's going to have to see how well does Trump perform out west. I don't think Kasich has got a prayer in light of the fact that his nickname is now 1 for 41. Okay, so I think that the whole Kasich ship has sailed. I think he's got to look at how well does he perform out west.
Right.
He's got to pick whatever his weakest region is and pick an insider from that region to bolster his argument.
He's got some real thinking to do. Listen, Miles Bauer, we've got to go to a break because I've got the next guest in hold, and we've kind of crammed up because this topic just keeps me on the edge of my chair. But as we go forward, I guarantee you I'm going to try to get you back on, and I appreciate you calling in this morning.
Thank you so much. I certainly appreciate it.
Yep, thank you, Miles Bauer. Folks, we'll be right back with Pastor Tim Cross.
You're listening to The Mike Hewitt Show on News Talk 1090 WKBZ and Talk 1230 WTKG.
RenegadeRiver.com is new and used firearms, all priced to sell, plus ammo, reloading supplies, optics, clothing, lasers, and yes, tactical gear. RenegadeRiver.com, family owned right here in Michigan, because you deserve it. And this is the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. Now we're into segment number 2.
Hey, listen, folks, if you're just dialing in, we've got Ludwig von Wiedendorsky and Pax in the studio, along with Brian Thomas, keeping us on track and on path. On the line with us is Pastor Tim Cross. Pastor Cross, welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you again, sir.
Hey, listen, one of the things that I keep getting my mind stuck on, Pastor Tim, is when I and you've heard me say it probably before, but I keep saying no matter what we do politically, unless we save the American family, everything else we're doing is for naught. I passionately believe that. That concept or that position of mine started when I was looking at inner cities and the plight of marriage and relationships, and now with the national birth rate last year of 48% to unwed mothers, and there seems to be, at least, and maybe I'm being sensational, I don't know, but there seems to be a breakdown in really at the basic relationship level, and it may be wrapped around things like respect. I'm not certain, but I know that you're very immersed in working with at least most of this element. So tell me what insights can you share with us?
Well, I would be in agreement with you. I think it's very disconcerting to take a look at what is happening in inner cities. They say that close to 80% of the children born in the inner cities are born to single-parent homes, which means to a mom. And I was raised by a single mother, but you missed something there. And I believe that the design was that children were to be raised by a father and by a mother. And there are certain things that take place there. There are certain things that a mom provides. There's certain things a dad provides. And it's also, there's stability and there's identity. There's strength and security in that. And we're having a generation that is now being raised without that traditional or nuclear family. And I think we're partly seeing the results of it in culture and society. And I think unless we can turn that around, we're going to be in major trouble. And I think one of the things, if you take a look at a great deal of media and really entertainment, we used to have shows like Father Knows Best, or we used to have solid family shows, even back to the Cosbys. But, do we even have that model out there? Do we have a model of what a home is supposed to look like, what a family is supposed to look like? And part of the things that we do in the going into the public schools is trying to teach some of those traditional things and the kind of things that make that work. If you take a look at the studies, people that are married live longer. People that are married are healthier. They show that the longer people are married, their emotional well-being is much better. The benefits in a culture, they show that married folks end up accumulating more wealth. They pass it on. There's greater stability. Kids do better in school when they come from, a two-parent family. All the studies show that really having a solid family and children being raised in a solid family, it goes off the charts. And everything gets better and increases.
It's funny. It's funny. One of the things on that note, Pastor Tim, is I went looking for. In fact, I wasn't even going to use it as part of my show prep. I did this about a week ago, preparing for this type of show, and so I went looking for reasons for people to get married. And one of the things I found is from AskMen.com that lists their top 10 reasons for people to get married, and none of them, at least in my way of thinking. And by the way, folks, I am not perfect on this, so I don't want anyone to think that I'm coming down from the mountain with some insight from God and that my life has been perfect. That wouldn't be true. But when I look at this list that they've created, to me, it's not reasons for marriage. They're all me items on their list. Literally, it's a list of marriage brings financial benefits. Marriage means more sex. Marriage means better sex. And I'm reading it going, I don't think these folks understand at least what I think is the real reasons for marriage. And maybe that's part of the problem, that this is the type of thing that's being advocated for in popular culture rather than some real foundational life choices.
Well, children do much better in two-parent homes, and I think although all those things may be true, there's security. I think there's a Bible verse, not trying to preach, but the Bible says it's not good for man to be alone, and I think there's companionship. I've been married. This year will be 35 years, and I think somewhat the idea of what marriage looks like. It's not all romance. It is, and I think they show that men that are married tend to be more successful than men that aren't married because they have to learn to work through things. I've had to learn to compromise. I've had to learn to work with my wife.
And your wife has had to learn to put up with you, Pastor Tim.
You're absolutely right, man.
I've met her, and you married up, brother.
I would not debate that in the least bit, sir.
I'm just telling. Listen here. Tell me if I'm off in the weeds on this. When I look at young folks that are in the marrying age, if you will, that are announcing they're going to get married next June or whatever they're going to do, it feels like, and I think you probably do some marriage counseling through your church.
Oh yeah.
But it feels like, Pastor Tim, that a lot of these young folks really don't understand what marriage is. That they've not either witnessed it from their own parents, or they're getting married for the immediate gratification and romance reasons. It feels like they're maybe too emotionally immature to make that kind of decision, and that's part of the problem that causes, frankly, children from single parents. So, am I wrong? You do it for a living. I don't.
Yeah, I would agree with you completely, sir. And I think it still comes down to the picture that we have of marriage. We've had to move my in-laws in with us there. My father-in-law fought in World War II, and my mother-in-law had been dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's, and she passed away just a few weeks ago in our home. But, to see, I watched, there's a movie called The Notebook, but I watched it right underneath my roof. I watched when my father-in-law, they basically said she had about a week to live, and would pick her up. We would get her out of the wheelchair and just set her next to him. And I get choked up thinking about it.
Yep.
And he would just, and she would put her head on his shoulder, and he'd just hold her hand.
Yep.
And he crawled in bed with her at one point when she became, they had a hospital bed just to be close to her.
Sure.
And, there's a side that, they had 2 children. They lost 2 or 3 in the process, miscarriages and stuff. But they fought through life. And to see at the end the commitment, my father-in-law looked at me and said, Tim, I haven't had another girlfriend my entire life.
Right.
That's a picture of 2 people that have, it wasn't all about romance, because marriage is not all about romance. Thank God for the romance. But it's about working together. It's about partnering together. It's about believing in one another. It's about being by each other's side through the good and the bad. And I think that, to me, a lot of that comes down to character. And I think that, some of where a lot of people are today is we haven't emphasized and valued the character, the commitment, the honoring and respecting each other, and that, hey, we've got a partner to fight through life together. We honor the romance, and we almost paint the wrong picture of what marriage is really like, because it's not all about romance.
It really isn't. And in fact, I write a little bit as a personal hobby, and if I'm not writing on one of my the novel or whatever, or some short stories, sometimes I'll write prose. And for folks that are not aware, prose is kind of a form of poetry. But one of the things that I wrote, it was titled Expectations. It was on this topic. And the reason I bring it up right now, you'll be glad not to recite a poem, but the reason I bring it up right now is I think one of the missing ingredients is our understanding of what to expect. I think our expectations as young folks are really, really off target. And I believe that. And I say to us, okay, it's easy for us to sit in the big chairs here and pontificate on what the problems are, but what are the cures? I mean, we've got to, as a society, get our hands around the cures and start marching in whatever direction they're in before we're just done.
Yeah. And I think, I mentioned my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, but I think, someplace our role models, we've got to, if I can say, there's one man that does a lot of teaching on, we call it men's ministry, teaching men. He said that, the good news about your heroes is you become like your heroes. The bad news about heroes is you become like your heroes.
Right.
It's who do we, what are our role models, and what are we looking at, and what are we, in a sense, lifting up in culture. And the scary thing is the kind of role models that are being, and the heroes that are being lifted up. And unless we change the type of role models in culture, the kind of thing that we are lifting up, I'm sorry, but the Caitlyn Jenner thing is a hero. That is a pathetic role model as far as I'm concerned.
It is, but let me interject for one moment. One of the things I've noticed in my life is that the more we hear things or the more we experience them, the more accustomed they become and the more acceptable they are. So
Yes.
it's like the first time you say a really filthy word, you go, holy mackerel, I can't believe I said that. And the next time you say it without thinking, and before long, it's just part of your normal conversation, and you don't think about it at all. I've got relatives that talk in front of 80-year-old women in the family with F this and F that, and and they're in their 30s. That's a different generation, a different way of looking at words, perhaps. But it's a complete. I just can't. I'm 55. I can't fathom talking that way in front of my 82-year-old mother. That thought would never, ever, my head would explode first. And that doesn't seem to be the circumstance nowadays. And I say that because there's a basic element of respect that seems to be wilting before our eyes that we've got to get our head around.
Yeah, and, the cultural norms that we once had, I was raised in a Southern culture, and that when a woman walked in a room, you stood up.
Yep.
Your conversation immediately changed. When I was a young child, man, I learned a whole new language when I went out hunting with my uncles. they never talked that way. My grandmother.
Oh, absolutely not. And my dad never talked that way, but when we went hunting, there'd be fellows that did. And my dad, the old man, would say, that's shop talk. That's not how we talk around the women folk. Now, that's from a different era. And I think that's the fact that it's from a different era is part of the problem we're identifying. And by the way, folks, when I'm thinking of the word respect, it isn't just do we respect the women folk, because I'm not on a gender issue right now. If you don't project respect, it's because you probably don't respect yourself. And I don't care what the gender is. I think that we have what I refer to now as a cultural identity crisis. You talk about Bruce Jenner, and I got off on a spiel about what we're willing to accept. It's the same thing with the transgender group. The numbers of folks that fall into that category are so small that it's almost indivisible into the greater number. It's so small. But we're flipping our society upside down. for those numbers, and it causes me to pause and go, I don't think that's what they're really after. They're after something greater, to flip the whole cart over for one apple.
Yeah, and I think it's almost as you said, turning the world upside down and turning really some of those, I want to say, those building blocks. As we work with young men and we work with young ladies, the building blocks of society is the family. It is respect. It is honor. It's hard work. It is the home. It is, and I'm going to say, and I'm very traditional. I believe there's roles of men and there's roles of women, and I think that's what's made. There's a lot of things that's made America great, but I think it comes down to we had a certain culture, we had a certain way of doing things that it caused prosperity. It caused, in a sense, increase. It caused, I might say, a blessing to the nation. We are now shifting that totally, that if it continues in this vein, we're going to begin to see the decline, or we are seeing the decline of our nation, because we have lost track of the values and the value systems that made America great. And
Pastor Tim, do you remember when Dan Quayle got into the big argument with Murphy Brown?
Yes, sir.
And that was roughly 24 years ago. And at the time, the born to single parent rate was about 15%. And as I said at the top of this segment, it's now at 48% last year. Listen, everyone in all of the media, pop culture in general, made fun of Dan Quayle. I don't know if anyone's noticed it, but Dan Quayle was right. And our culture's in free fall. He was exactly right, fighting that fight.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can't have a free sex culture without having the consequences of that.
Now you want us to be responsible, Pastor Tim.
Wow.
What's that?
Wow, what kind of fun is that?
Well, we have a principle we teach that maturity is not based on age, but it's on the acceptance and handling of responsibility. I say we have an extremely immature culture. We're seeing it on the college campuses. Nobody wants to be offended. Nobody wants to hear anything that might rub them the wrong way. It's like, goodness gracious, folks, life, you're going to have stuff that you're going to have to deal with, and not everything is going to go easier, and are you going to like everything you come in contact with?
Oh, shucks, I'm entitled.
Well, that's immaturity. That is an immature, and the reason is we have built a victim mentality, and especially into our young people. We've built an entitlement mentality. We have not built responsibility. It's always somebody else's fault. It's, if somebody, and somebody has to be sued or what have you, we are not taking responsibility for our lives. Therefore, we are not maturing. We are not becoming people of character. We stay immature. And then when that goes into marriage relationships, emotionally immature people don't have the ability to stick through the tough times, because marriage is not always fun. There's been a few times my wife has said she doesn't like me. There's some times I've said to her, I don't like you either.
Pastor, I got a question for you. You had talked about Fathers Knows Best, and I'm watching this thing on CNN. It's the 70s, and they talk about how TV transformed America, with the starting point being Fathers Knows Best, and those shows went by the wayside for All in the Family. Mm-hmm. They almost say All in the Family is their turning point. But then when I listen to you further on, as you've been talking, All in the Family kind of did offend people. And it did everything that you said it were not able to do anymore. But at the same time, it showed a different side of the family. Do you think TV's been the major player in this whole transformation?
I think media as a whole, whether it's television, MTV, we've had a generation raised on MTV, now today with the internet and et cetera, but it's the pictures that were painted. It was the vision that was put in front of people as being normal, and whether we like it or not, what is it? Art, our life imitates art, or whatever. Art imitates life. But I mean, someplace in there, that type of role model, that type of picture, and as Mike said, does that become the norm? And we have gone from the norm of a nuclear family to the norm of, some guys have got 20 different kids with 20 different women. and are proud of it. You know, I remember Diana Ross and the Spring singing "Love Child" back their song back in the '60s. I mean, I was in diapers, but I remember the song.
Yeah, and it goes to what I was saying earlier, Pastor Tim. The more they get us to hearing and digesting those types of approaches to life choices, the more accepting it becomes to us. And it's like the envelope keeps getting further and further and further ripped open until sooner or later everything that we value will be dumped out of it. But listen, Pastor Tim, I've got to stop now because we're out of time. But you and I, we're going to have to tear this topic up. I've got to get you back on somewhere in the next few weeks as we get through this election, because I think this is critical and genuinely foundational to everything else we're doing. But before I let you go, you work on an organization that works with youth. What's the name of that organization?
It's called Men of Honor, and we basically go and teach traditional manhood, and we also have the companion program, Ladies of Honor, teach some of those traditional manhood, womanhood principles that previous generations lived by. You know, man's word is his bond. You know, that aspect of responsibility, accountability.
Amen. Listen, before you go, there's a fellow named Casey that told me to make sure I told you that the Sig Sauer he picked up yesterday is better than your Browning.
I tell him I got an old Aerosmith song for him. It's called Dream On.
All right. Pastor Tim, thank you very, very much. Folks, we'll be right back with the Enigma Report.
This is the Mike Hewitt Show on News Talk 1090 WKBZ and West Michigan's Talk 1230 WTKG.
RenegadeRiver.com is new and used firearms, all priced to sell, plus ammo, reloading supplies, optics, clothing, lasers, and yes, tactical gear. RenegadeRiver.com, family owned right here in Michigan, because you deserve it.
3, 2, 1, 0.
And the Mike Hewitt Show is brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. Look what's coming around the corner. It is the Enigma Report. Take it away, Mike.
Oh my gosh! So here's where we're at. Here's the enigma that I'm wrestling with right now, and of course I'm segueing back to politics because I can't stop myself. There's shock. But listen, here's the enigma for me. I'm watching the continue, even last night on the news, I'm watching folks yell about the delegate count, who's stealing delegates, and in fact, I got invited to speak last night to a group right here in Muskegon, a wonderful group, by the way. The folks were trying to understand how the delegate process works, the differences between a caucus, a convention, and a primary, open primary, closed primary, all of these different choices. And when you're listening to the news as they hop from state to state, just like I told this group last night, I've been doing this for a long time. I got to slow myself down so that I don't get confused, because it can be confusing. And so in the course of the conversation, by the way, this wasn't the enigma I wanted to talk about until I got there last night. And I started it with a hand raise. How many folks know how we nominate both parties, Democratic and Republican? How many folks know how we nominate our Attorney General and Secretary of State in the state of Michigan? I think 2 people out of a fairly good-sized room. Do you know?
I only know because I went to my first place to find out where and how that happens.
I have to tell you something.
2 years ago.
Here's the enigma today that I'm trying to outline. It has nothing to do with folks knowing or not knowing. How can we have a government class in public education? We have government. It's mandated. You have to have a government class. Am I wrong? Does that still happen?
When I went through school, you did, but you didn't learn anything about politics or political party structure.
But listen, I'm not trying to teach people about my ideology.
Oh, no, that's not what I mean by politics.
I am right now, but listen, and I don't expect schools to do that.
Yeah.
But what I find just totally mind-boggling is that a person can go through 13 years of formal taxpayer-funded education and not have, myself included, I'm not chastising anybody, myself included, how can we go through 13 years of formal public taxpayer-funded education and not have a clue how our basic system functions? That's mind-boggling to me. Not only do they not teach it, they don't mention it. It doesn't come up. How can something as basic as how we get a president not come up in 13 years of public education?
It comes up.
It doesn't come up.
You vote on the first Tuesday of every November.
That's
every
not
November
teaching
1st.
them.
No, but that's what I'm saying.
Or
that's
little,
as far as it goes.
Or little innuendos that I'm the teacher and I support the most furthest left person we can possibly find, Zig Heil. That's not teaching either.
No.
What I'm saying is that I'm not even getting, by the way, don't be mad at me, folks, I was teasing. What I'm talking about is just the basics. A nomination process is different than in an election. In fact, it's so different, it's like comparing a roller skate to a whale. One has nothing to do with the other. Not like kind of, sort of, a little bit the same. Nothing to do with the other. Here in the great state of Michigan, you have the Libertarian Party. Okay, they're all about freedom. Some folks would say they're all about too much. Well, I'm not even taking a position on that. Here's my point. They nominate in convention. The Green Party nominates in convention. These are party functions. They just are. That's what they are. They're a party function. You can run as an independent. You can do that, folks. You don't have to be nominated. Be an independent.
I think if you ask most people if they even knew that there was another party besides the two main ones, they go, what do you mean? Well, there's like the taxpayers and the Green Party and the Libertarian.
Do you know what the taxpayer party is? It's the Constitution Party that happens to that when they first started out. That's what they were called, and they become the Constitution Party. But it takes a lot of money to change your name once you're set up in a state. So they've remained the U.S. Taxpayers Party in the state of Michigan rather than the Constitution Party. But their nomination is in convention. Because it's a party nomination. That's where the party picks the Democratic Party, the Republican Party. All of these parties have these choices because, frankly, for lack of better words, they're public. They're not. They're private organizations. You know, the county party is whatever your county party is. By the way, whether you're listening to me in Kent County or Muskegon or Ottawa, the county party, whether it's Democratic or Republican, is a separate organization from your congressional district organization, which is a separate entity from your state party, whatever party you're allegiance to, or no party, by the way. These things are all basic. That's my point. They are absolutely foundational, basic. And there's people driving down the road say, well, maybe it shouldn't be that way. Okay, maybe not. That's a separate debate. But until the vast majority are taught how it is, we can't have an honest conversation about how it ought to be if this isn't the way it ought to be. I'm not taking a position on that. I'm saying when only two people out of an entire room know how we nominate the Attorney General for the state of Michigan and the Secretary of State as candidates, we have a problem. What's the old thing? Houston, we have a problem.
I can tell you, I didn't know until I went to the state convention. I'm like, oh, this is where you get the lieutenant governor even. The guy who could be the governor if something happened to our governor is nominated at the convention. I used to wonder, how did the Green Party pick Ralph Nader? How did they just get to decide their candidate, but we're going to go vote next week? Like, that seems weird. I didn't know this was the process because it's not taught. Now, but if it's not taught, couldn't we... I don't know. I know it's not the responsibility of a congressman or state representative or anything, but could they offer to go into the class?
Listen, there's a teacher. The teachers, by the way, can do this. It ought to, and to my mind, it ought to be mandated by. And I'm not. Keep in mind, my politics calls for township level education decisions.
Yep.
I'm still very old school, very, very old school. I think that's where education is best. Having said that, if we're going to mandate a government class, it ought to at least cover the basic functions of how we end up with government and elected officials in the first place. That's just me. But listen, in Grand Haven High School, there's a teacher named Mr. Sweats. He's left-leaning. That's me being polite. He's a nice guy. He really is. And in fact, he invited me in years ago to speak to his government classes to talk about party politics. If there were, and keeping in mind, he knows I'm a little bit right wing. I congratulate him. I do, honest, I do. What a great guy looking out for his class to say, let's get someone from a political party to come talk about what party politics is. If there were more teachers doing more of that kind of outreach to the community so that young folks were better prepared to make decisions and indeed even know how those decisions are made, we'd have a lot better of a society. We'd at least have a better chance at a better society. But when we don't even know the basic fundamentals of how nominations are made and why that's not an election, why it's not a popular vote, I hear that on the TV all the time. It's not a popular vote. It should be a popular vote. Why? It's a nomination within a party.
Yeah.
That's what the point is. We don't have a direct French-style democracy, and this is not the general election. The election, that's where we have that's a different topic, an entirely different topic than a nomination is.
That's not even necessarily popular vote.
We have an electoral college vote. If we didn't have an electoral college vote, New York and California would tell us who the president's going to be.
Yep.
It's just math.
Oh, yeah.
You can say, I don't like the electoral college vote. Okay. Then just get a landline, call California and New York. Who's going to be our president? Okay, thanks. Save billions of dollars. That's how I see it. But you have to figure out, but before you can get into these intricate kind of decisions, you got to know how the thing works in the first place.
Do you think maybe they don't want people to know?
I don't think it's that.
Or do you think it's just ignorance of not knowing?
I don't know. No one ever said teach it. We need to teach it. Folks, I hear the music. Find us on Twitter at Talk Mike Hewitt. Find us on Facebook. That's where most of the big announcements are happening, is on Facebook, / The Mike Hewitt Show on Facebook. And then also, I'm doing a better job at keeping it up at themikehewitt.com. Find us there. Send me an email. Send me a Facebook message. Give us a call sometime. I look forward to talking to you next Wednesday. You're gonna love next Wednesday. Oh,
I can't wait.
You have no idea. I've got a monster-sized show planned. Oh, you gonna be here?
Oh, yeah. I live for this.
Pat's gonna be here?
Yeah.
Brian has to be here. Folks, big grin. Folks, we'll see you next Wednesday at 9 a.m. And in the meantime, find us on YouTube. Have a great week.
Renegade River, guns and ammo, and so much more. Old-fashioned service with surprisingly low prices. On M104 at the top of the new 231 bypass in Utica. Or find us at renegaderiver.com, because you deserve it.
This is News Talk 1090 WKBZ and Talk 1230 WTKG.